We start a new series, a walkthrough of the Old Testament. If you have participated in the CEP previously, this is kind of like a repeat, but might be a bit truncated one because this is an hour and 15 minutes maybe. The CEP is for 2 hours. But nonetheless, we are very thankful to have this opportunity to do a walkthrough of the Old Testament. The reason why I do this is because I realized that, and a lot of people also told me that they find the Old Testament very difficult to understand. The New Testament, Philippians are very lovely to read. Okay, but then when you go to the Old Testament, it become a bit too foreign. Okay, and you need to basically, can we have like a walkthrough so that you know kind of like the map of the Old Testament around the Old Testament books. All right, so that's what we're going to do. Now, Old Testament scholars usually divide Old Testament history, or rather Israel's history, into 3 periods. Before the exile, exile, and after the exile. Before the exile is called pre-exilic, exilic, and post-exilic. Is that okay? And so, as you can see then, that it all surrounds around the exile. We need to pay a lot of focus on the exile, which means a lot of what people talk about in the Old Testament has a lot to do with this guy. His name is King Nebuchadnezzar. And King Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon. You will find him in 2 Kings. You'll find him in the book of Daniel, for example. Although he may appear to be a minor character in the Bible, but his influence on the Old Testament cannot be underestimated. And here's the reason why. So King Nebuchadnezzar, he was the king of the Babylonian Empire.
Hello, test. Okay.
Irene, can you hear me now? So many Irenes. Let me wait for Irene to respond. Okay, by faith, by faith, we hope that they can hear. All right. So Nebuchadnezzar, he was the king of Babylon. Babylon is here. By this time, they've taken over most of the Mesopotamian world. And Nebuchadnezzar was interested to invade Egypt, or at least prevent Egypt to never ever come up. And in order to do that, you have to go through what is called the Fertile Crescent along the river Euphrates, right? Tigris and Euphrates come up here, and then you will come. This is called the Fertile Crescent. Nobody goes through here because this is the desert, right? So basically, this is the highway, right? Part of the highway. And so, what the Babylonian Empire did was that they had the deal with Judea, with the kingdom of Judah, and said that all you need to do is to submit to us. You still can run your country. I'm not interested to run your country. I just need to make sure that you keep the Egyptians in check, right? And you pay your annual tribute or something. But what ended up happening was that the king of Judah rebelled against Babylon. And what happened was that the king of Babylon then came to invade and destroyed the temple in Jerusalem and exiled the people of Judah to Babylon. All right. So that is a very watershed moment in Israel's history where they were taken into exile. Right? The siege of Babylon, the siege of Jerusalem, 587. And at that time, there were a lot of discussion as to how did this happen to us? Why does this happen? Some say it's because we're militarily weaker than the Babylonians. That's why, right? That's a very naturalistic explanation. Others who are more spiritually inclined may say something like, actually, the battle of nations are actually the battle of the gods. Okay, and clearly, Marduk, the god of the Babylonians, overpowered our God Yahweh. All right, so our God lost to the foreign god, like that. Another group of people say, no, our God is all powerful. But what happened is that God had a deal with us, called a covenant with us, and God has reneged on the covenant. God has forgotten about us. He has abandoned us. So that is why when you read books like Ezekiel, books like Daniel, it will tell you, no, that's not the case. What really happened is we have been disobedient to the covenant. Because we have been disobedient to the covenant, and the covenant spells out for you in Deuteronomy 28 that if you go against the covenant, if you rebel against God, if you worship the idols, then God is going to send curses to the land. And the last of the curses was to expel Israel from their land. And that is exactly what happened. And so when people begin to realize that that is the case, okay, when people begin to be won over by that, then they say, hey, has there been any prophets before us, right, before this, that is of this view, of the view that we have broken covenant with God, we have worshipped the idols, so therefore this is the covenantal curse on us. And the promise is that one day God will bring us back into the land. And so they begin to treasure writings of their earlier ancestors, right, who are of this line of thinking. You see, because Israel is not just everybody think the same way. If everybody thought the same way, everybody obeyed God, they wouldn't have been exiled in the first place. It is precisely because people were idolatrous, okay? People were worshipping all kinds of things, or people don't even regard God as God. That is why they end up in exile, which means that is the majority. Which means that the Bible way of thinking, the Old Testament way of thinking of who God is to us, that we're in a covenant with God, is the position of the minority. Does that make sense? I need to get this clear through to you. Okay. They ended up in exile. The reason why they ended up in exile because they have been rebellious against God. They've been rebellious against God, that means they have been idolatrous. For generations, they have been idolatrous. Okay? That means, right, the majority of the country are idolatrous, which means those who hold on to the biblical faith was a minority. So therefore, their works were not really regarded until they end up in exile. They say, oh no, it really happened according to what these minority people say. And so then they go back and look for, hey, what did they write about? Do you have any knowledge of that? Do you have any knowledge of that? And they began to compile the work, all right, of their ancestors who have been faithful to God, and that become the view of the Jewish people who then now come back from Babylon to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. And from now on, these collected works that they have been collecting now become what we call the Old Testament. You understand? Because before that, nobody cares, ma. If people cared, they would have ended up in exile. That means the exile and the formation of the Old Testament has a lot to do with the exile experience. And it must therefore be crafted in such a way that make the most sense to people in exile or just after the exile. You get it? Cool? I'm not saying that all of it were written during the exile, after the exile. I'm saying that stuff that were written earlier all right, that is not circulated very well because people didn't care, but still kept by a minority, say Daniel, say Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, right? They must have kept some, right? Because you imagine Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, they were, everyone else worship the bow down to the idol that Nebuchadnezzar set up. Only 3 men. Israel was down to 3 faithful men. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Okay. Huh? 4, Daniel, right? Plus Daniel. And perhaps it is that event, that is so public spectacle, that really drove the rest of the Jews to also, okay, they must be right because God saved Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego from such a public display of the furnace or some other, or whatever the case is. People became really, really attached to these writings, and therefore the writings grew, and people add forward and post postlude and all kind of things to frame the whole thing together to be what is known as the Hebrew Bible. And it continues to grow until a couple of centuries before Christ, when it finally fit together into the Old Testament that we have today. Now, of course, then, what are those stories about? What are those writings about? Those writings were about, a lot of it about what happened before the exile, how far back it goes back to the Bronze Age. This topic today is called Background of the Old Testament. So I will start at the Bronze Age. Before 1200 BC, the world looked like this. Now, back in those days, there is the Mesopotamian civilization, the Sumerians, and then there is the Hittites over here towards Anatolia, towards modern-day Turkey, all right? And then there is the Egyptian empire, right? So the world is kind of like in 3 segments: the Hittites area, the Mesopotamian, Sumerian Mesopotamian, and the Egyptian empire. And the world at that time was quite well developed. And it is in those days that we find people like Abraham. These are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran fathered Lot. Lot died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of kindred in Ur of the Chaldeans. So Ur of the Chaldeans is here. So this is where Terah's family, Abraham's family started. And Abram Nahor took wives. The name of Abraham's wife was Sarai. The name of Nahor's wife, Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Ishka. Now Sarai was barren, she had no child. Terah took Abram, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son, Abram's wife. And they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, which is somewhere up here, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years. Terah died in Haran. So it really comports with how, so basically what they did was that they walked around along the river, right? Like I said, along the Fertile Crescent to come down there. Which means in order for something like this happen, the world was already quite developed and also well patrolled. Otherwise, nobody can safely make across from town to town safely. You see? So it was a very well-managed world at that time. So the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, which is this place. And I will make you a great nation, bless you, make your name great, you'll be a blessing. I'll bless those who bless you, those who dishonor you, I will curse. In you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. They came to the land of Canaan. They came to Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land, all right? So this land is known as the land of Canaan because the natives were called the Canaanites. Then the Lord appeared to Abram, said that I will give you this land. To your offspring, I will give this land. All right. So when you think of Abraham, you think of the Bronze Age. Now, bronze is an alloy. that is made of aluminum and tin. And aluminum, no problem. The problem is tin. Is it? No, 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 not aluminum. Copper and tin. Copper and tin. I'm sorry. So sorry. Copper and tin. I was thinking, what am I talking about? Copper and tin. So copper you can find everywhere. All right. Aluminum deposits. They live here. This is where they are at. It's pretty sparse of tin. So to get tin, they have to secure it deep in Central Asia. Okay, or go west, all right, to Spain or something like that. So there is a soft underbelly in the Bronze Age in that you need to constantly have access to tin. So that is why maybe in order to secure tin and therefore bronze for everyone, there need to be peace. Right? So the ancient kings worked really hard to, as much as possible, to maintain peace in order for trade to happen so that everybody gets bronze. You see what I mean? So it's actually quite fragile. And at the same time, there is also the Egyptians developing their own civilization. I'll not go deep into this one. I did go into this one with the CEP class, but note that Genesis 47, Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they gained possessions in it and were fruitful and multiplied greatly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the days of Jacob, the years of his life, were 147 years. All right. So we are talking about probably the second intermediate period and then between the second intermediate period and the new kingdom. Reason is because during the second, so what happened is that Egypt is really old. Egypt is really old. The pyramid, the Great Pyramid of Giza, is 2500 BC. That means we're talking about 500 years before Abraham. Okay, so it's just unimaginable how old it is. Cleopatra lived in 69 to 30 at the time of Jesus. All right, Cleopatra lived at the time of Jesus. That we are closer to Cleopatra than Cleopatra is to the pyramid. In fact, yeah. We are much closer to Cleopatra by about 500 years than Cleopatra is to the pyramid. From us to Cleopatra, 2000 years, from Cleopatra to pyramid, 2500 years. So much so that Cleopatra sent archaeologists to dig around the pyramid to figure out what it was all about. Okay. All right. So during that long history, there were periods whereby the country wasn't united, or at least not run by the Egyptians. So one of those period is the second intermediate period. So that is why some people think that Joseph and his family became rulers around the second intermediate period, whereby the Egyptians were ruled by a group of people called Hyksos, who are actually Semitic, ruled by foreign people. And then the new kingdom, they got rid of the foreign rulers and re-established their own pharaoh. So maybe this is where it says a new pharaoh has arisen in Egypt who did not recognize Joseph. Because Joseph, right, kind of like the Mongol taking over the right, okay, so became the new so the pharaoh in the second intermediate period were Semitic, they were not Egyptians. So that is the possibility, that is the kind of background that we are talking about. Can follow? Huh? So all the descendants of Jacob was 70%. Joseph was already in Egypt. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Bear in mind that everything I say about the history is disputed because history is always disputed. Okay, but this is some possibility of where these events or when these events could have occurred. Yeah, that's why now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us because they were the old rulers. There's a lot of silence between when Joseph became the vizier, became the prime minister, and the time where the new pharaoh arose, you see. So I suppose over time, the sons of Jacob took over, the descendants of Jacob took over the government, and that was the second intermediate period. That's entirely possible. There's a lot of gap in our knowledge of history, but this is one place whereby such a thing could happen. And all these things would have happened during the late Bronze era. So then, once the Egyptians gain control back of their country, so they begin to oppress their previous overlords, right? So things were kind of like going well for the Bronze Age until the Bronze Age collapsed. And the collapse of the Bronze Age is one of those events in the world that is very hard to understand. It is basically the collapse of everything at the same time. Okay, so I think it's something like, let's just say there's a solar flare that happens, right? And then all our electronics all over the world gets fried, right? Then basically the whole world comes to a halt, right? So that was what happened during the late Bronze Age, at the end of the Bronze Age era, whereby there was famine plus earthquake plus pandemic plus war plus I don't know what. Basically, every problem that you can think of all happened at the same time. All right. So then the last straw that broke the camel's back was that there was a lot of earthquake going on here as well among the Hittites, descendants of Hittites, and they needed to migrate out of the land, all right, to seek for greener pastures. Of course, that migration pattern, the men go first to fight, all right, then the women and children come and follow behind. And so they left a trail of destruction that called the sea peoples, all right? The sea peoples. And that really severely weakened Egypt. So the Pharaoh during Moses' time, okay, was actually a severely weakened empire already by then. Okay. And on top of that, to suffer 10 plagues, that would be unimaginable. But the thing is that as you can see, the whole Fertile Crescent was at war and destruction. So the whole route that secures tin, copper very easy. Copper you just get from Cyprus, right? In fact, the word Cyprus just come from Kuprum, right? Kuprum, that's just copper. So this is just copper land. And but the problem is tin, you have to get very deep here. And when the trade route, Babylon is at war, Aleppo, the whole world was up in flames. Population went down by very significant number. Civilization were destroyed, empires, leaders gets killed. And so it was basically kind of like back to the Stone Age because they've lost access to what makes bronze, right? So they have lost access to what makes bronze. And it is during this period of the collapse of the Bronze Age that the Exodus happened. Okay, at the collapse of the Bronze Age, where that is why in the tabernacle, all the things in the tabernacle on the outside, the courtyard area, things are made of bronze, and then inside things are made of gold, right? Nothing is made of iron because we haven't entered into the Iron Age. You get it? Right? Things on the outside is made from bronze, things inside the tabernacle is made from gold because they haven't arrived at the Iron Age yet. And that also then throughout then during the Bronze Age also, they made their migration and also the conquest of the land of Canaan to establish the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay? And then Israel entered into a period of judges. These are the list of judges, whereby Israel at that time was not one unified country, but rather they were a confederate of tribes. Confederate of tribes. These judges, as you will read them, they don't control all of Israel either. They are mostly active within their own tribe. So each of these are like folklore tribal heroes that they had. And so they would cooperate with one another possibly when there is a foreign invader. That's why, for example, when you read about Gideon, he goes to war. Some people didn't follow him because it wasn't one unified nation. In fact, they are separated by the Jordan River. So the Cisjordanian often misunderstood what's going on in the Transjordan side. And Transjordanian also always have misgivings, because it's like this, this is the Penang Island, Butterworth is like that one. Okay? You cannot have Takam like that. So then they say, look, we cannot continue to be this confederation of tribes because other nations have kings that unify the country. And this judges thing, right, is like it's very tribal. Who knows where the next judge is going to come from? We need some stability. We need a leader permanently to lead us into battle. So Israel then demands a king. All the elders of Israel gathered together, came to Samuel, who was the last of the judges at Ramah, and said to him, behold, you are old. Your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the other nations. But unfortunately for Israel at that time, the rest of the world was entering into Iron Age. All right. Now, iron was mostly invented here. Okay, here. And so, let me get back to the map here. All right. Now, although this is the traditional allotment of the tribes of Israel, they don't always control all their own land. That's why they always have run-ins with the Philistines. They always have run-in with the Canaanites. The Canaanites were still there. This allocation is just the way that Joshua allocated. Doesn't mean that they are able to control the land. So most of the Israelites were dwelling along the hills. There's a mountain range, not mountain, a hill range. It's like Banjaran Titi Wangsa like that, in the middle. Right? This is the lowland. Here is the lowland. In the middle are the hills. So they become kind of like hill people. Right? So the coasts were controlled by the Philistines. Because the coasts were controlled by the Canaanites, the Philistines, and so on and so forth, Tyre and Sidon. So maritime trade was controlled by the Canaanites. You get it? The Israelites themselves were pushed inland, and because of that, when iron gets invented, all right, they were the last people to master iron smelting. The technology didn't reach them. The technology reaches the Philistines first. Okay, because the Philistines were in control of the coast. Does that make sense to you? Makes sense, right? Okay. So that is why during the Iron Age, 1 Samuel chapter 13, now there was no blacksmith to be found throughout all the land of Israel. We're in the Iron Age, but Israel was still in Bronze Age. Okay. And that is why all the battles of Israel are always against astronomical odds. That without God, they really will lose. Okay, because they were just technologically one age behind. That's why I tell you a country without AI labs is going to die. Right? Everyone doing AI and then we're still, let's just say, doing steam engine. Then we're dead. You see? So now there was no blacksmith to be found throughout all the land of Israel. For the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make themselves swords or spears. Okay? So you have just bronze weapons and no iron weapons. But every one of the Israelites went down to the Philistines. Went down, why does it say went down? Because they live on the hill. Right? Later in the afternoon, I'm going up to Cameron Highlands. Right? So I'm going out to the hill people, right? So my wife, my children came, we went to Cameron Highlands just a few weeks ago as well. Wow, here got McDonald's also. They begin to think about the transportation, right? Wow, just to get the burgers up there, right? No wonder they have to charge premium, isn't it? So for the Hebrews, for the Israelites, they had to go down to the Philistines to sharpen his plowshare, his mattock, his axe, or his sickle. And the charge was 2/3 of a shekel for the plowshare and for the mattocks. I'm not so familiar with the exchange rate. Okay, I can barely keep up with the US dollar these days. For 4 ringgit per US dollar, praise the Lord. So the charge, but we can imagine it's very expensive lah. All right, the idea is very expensive. 2/3 of a shekel for the plowshare and for the mattocks, and 1/3 of a shekel for sharpening the axes for setting the goads. So imagine when it comes to battle, what happens? The Philistines all iron sword, iron spears. The Israelites were still using axe, sickle, plowshare that the Philistines sharpened for you. All right? So at a big disadvantage, that was the time where King Saul became king. So on the day of the battle, there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people with Saul and Jonathan. But Saul and Jonathan, his son, had them. That means that all of Israel only got 2 swords. The king and the crown prince. Right? Everybody is fighting with farm utensils, farm equipment, right? Wooden, no lah, they got whatever lah, the Philistines happen to sharpen, they get lah. Now in battle, of course, you're going to embargo and not allow your blacksmith to help the Israelites sharpen their stuff, right? We'll set a very high tariff, right, for that to happen. And so that is why when you read in the Old Testament, the battles, it is always against astronomical odds. The battle, if they win, is always belong to the Lord. It is impossible for Israel to fight armies that is one technological age above them. You get it? That's where the trust in the Lord happens. So that was King Saul's time. King David also terrible. It was only because King David wins against the Philistines that he gained control of the coastland. Then Israel entered into the Iron Age, and then only there is the prosperity of Solomon. They said, "Wow, ship from Tarshish come lah, ship from abroad come lah." Why? The ship can come now to Israel because it's only during David's time, his victory over the Philistines, that they were able to secure the coastline. No? Can I? Hope the Bible not come alive a little bit more with this background. Okay, so then then Israel entered into a period of kings, right? So that is called the United Kingdom of Israel. Okay, the United Kingdom of Israel. And the kingdom was united under King Saul, but it's only united under 3 kings. King Saul, King David, King Solomon. After kings, so that was this is United Kingdom of Israel around the time of Saul and David. Okay, all these countries, Edom, Moab, Ammon, now become tributaries. Okay, they pay tribute to Solomon, and that is why things like Psalm 2. Why do the nations rage? Why do the peoples, they are conspiring against the Lord and His anointed one, like that, right? So, and then what happened is that Solomon had a son, Rehoboam. Both of them were cruel. Okay, but just that Rehoboam doesn't have half the brain the father had. Okay, you want to be cruel, you better be smart. Right? So he's cruel and not very smart. And so he lost half the country or more than half the country. So 10 tribes of Israel went and rebelled against David's house. And so that became the northern kingdom of Israel. So when you hear the northern kingdom or the kingdom of Israel, you're actually referring to this part. After Solomon, you're just talking about this part. The bottom here is called the kingdom of Judah. Right? This is where David's descendants still have control over. So David's descendants are only here after Solomon, Rehoboam onwards, and up north here is by Jeroboam. So Jeroboam, he built his capital city in Samaria, and in the south, the capital city is in Jerusalem, and there is the temple of Yahweh in Jerusalem built by Solomon. Then we come to this genealogy. The names are very small. It doesn't really matter. You can actually read them, all about them in your Bible. The green color side here refers to all the kings of Judah. The red color side here all refers to the kings of Israel. And as you can see, that the kings of Judah is all very direct arrows, because they are all descendants. This side, a lot of dot like that, because always got revolution. Because there's a legitimacy problem in the kingdom of Israel, in the northern kingdom of Israel. And Jeroboam has a problem. His problem is they all worship Yahweh, and the temple of Yahweh is in Jerusalem. There's this pilgrimage Passover lah, you know what I mean? They Passover, all my citizens during Passover, they go up to Jerusalem. It cannot lah like that, right? Cannot lah. Where to worship your God? You go worship your God in a foreign country. Cannot. So I said, don't need to worship Yahweh there. Here, he built 2 temples. He built one in Bethel in the south and one in Dan in the north. Right? 2 cities, Dan and Bethel. Okay, he built 2 temples so he can trap them. You want to go, don't need to go to Jerusalem. You want to worship Yahweh, you can also worship in Bethel, which means the house of God. Hey, why Jerusalem? Why not Bethel? Bethel is the house of God. Jacob had his dream here, Bethel here. And then in Dan, is the reason why Dan is because practical reason that is the northernmost border. And then as you can see, the kingdom of Israel is also much nearer to the Mesopotamian world than the kingdom of Judah, right? So the kingdom of Israel is in a particularly dangerous state all the time of being overpowered by the Assyrians in the north, who now runs Mesopotamia. And so if you are the king of Israel, you have to okay, first of all, the temple is in Jerusalem. That is the original one. Okay. I built 2 kind of counterfeit ones, all right, in Bethel and Dan. And I'm under so much pressure, influence from overseas, from the great civilization. And so there's a lot of influence, you see. And so then people start to introduce to them also, hey, I know your Yahweh God is to protect your city, maybe. Okay. But if you want harvest, maybe you should worship Baal. You see, different God in charge of different things, ma. You understand? And so Samaria, the northern kingdom of Israel, become really, really cosmopolitan in the sense that it's very diverse because there's a lot of foreign influence. It is masyarakat majmuk, it is what do you call it? Masyarakat majmuk, it's a plural society, right? It's a plural society. And so we have to be more moderate. You see, we need to be more open-minded about God, right? Because you got constituencies, ma. Some of the Canaanites also you never manage to finish, completely annihilate, right? The Canaanites will always live with them. So what are you going to do? You cannot kill them all, right? And then these foreign traders from Tyre and Sidon, right, bringing in their gods to worship. You cannot say these traders cannot set up your own temple, little shrine to worship, okay? And then they want you to come and cut ribbon also, ma. Cannot not? Need to cut ribbon, need to approve land for them. So even if you want to be a faithful Yahweh worshipper, you cannot be extremist. My point is that you cannot be an extremist. So they see this type of extremism, no, don't be extremism. We need to be more plural. Everything can, like that. So the country become very rojak in its religion. And so God has had enough with them. So that was a United Kingdom, divided kingdom. Now we're 722 BC, where Samaria eventually falls to the Assyrian Empire. And the goal of the Assyrians is, of course, to get to Egypt. Everybody wants to go to Egypt because Egypt was the Nile River. Nile River is the food basket of the entire civilization. Those of you who know history well, Alexander the Great, before he attacks Persia, first he attacks Egypt, right? He needs to make sure he controls Egypt. Then he will have the supplies, right? The logistics, the supplies, the food to attack Persia. You see, so they come from this way, and northern Israel is in the way, and so they destroyed northern Israel, Samaria. The fall of Samaria, 722 BC. This is Second Kings chapter 17. In the 12th year of Ahaz, the king of Judah, Hoshea, son of Elah, began to reign in Samaria over Israel, and he reigned 9 years. And he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, yet not as the kings of Israel who were before him. Against him came up Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, and Hoshea became his vassal and paid him tribute. But the king of Assyria found treachery in Hoshea, for he had sent messengers to Saul, king of Egypt. It is very typical. Israel, Judah, they always had to do this dance between the Assyrians or any of the Mesopotamian powers and Egypt. 50 years China, 50 years US, you know. Okay, see who, you know what I mean? So you have to, right? You have to see which side. So you have to play both sides in order to maintain the center, right? You have to play both sides. When the Assyrians found that Hoshea also sent messengers to Saul, and then didn't offer tribute to Assyria. That means now you want to go with the Egyptians. So therefore, the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. Then the king of Assyria invaded all the land and came to Samaria, and for 3 years he besieged it. 2 Kings chapter 7, verse 6. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria, and he carried the Israelites away to Assyria and placed them in Halah on the Habor, the river of Gozan, in the cities of the Medes. So what he did was that he depopulated Samaria, okay, and brought all that's why they call the lost 10 tribes of Israel or things like that, all right? We can argue whether they were actually lost or whatever, but what happened was that they were depopulated, they were taken. Of course, some of them who managed to escape down to Judah, right, will escape down to Judah as refugees. You know what I mean? Okay, so many of them came in, and they come in, so they bring problems. They bring the problems of the north to the south as well, but that's a different story. So now they got depopulated, and they brought in foreigners into the land, like that. So so that people will never rebel, you see, because if you have no connection to the land, you cannot unify to rebel against the Assyrians. Yeah. So this is the theological interpretation of how did Samaria fall. When the Lord had torn Israel from the house of David, they made Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, king. And Jeroboam drove Israel from following the Lord and made them commit great sin, which is to make the temple in Bethel and the temple in Dan. The people of Israel walked in all the sins that Jeroboam did, that is worshipping at these two illegitimate temples. They did not depart from them until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had spoken by all his servants the prophet. So Israel was exiled from their own land Assyria until this day. And the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the people of Israel. And they took possession of Samaria and lived in its cities. So basically, the northern Israel was gone. The original native population were sent out. Okay, and they brought in other people whom they have also invaded. So the kind of like population change, right? Okay. Yeah. All right. So then the Assyrians didn't last too long. They got overrun by the Babylonians. And so now the Babylonians turn to, okay, now let's get to Egypt. The Assyrians didn't make it there. We are going to get there. So in the ninth year of, so this now, we fast forward 150 years or so. Okay, slightly less than 150 years. So Samaria, 722 BC. Southern Judah managed to survive another 100 over years. They say, oh, you know why we survived the 100 over years? Because we got the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. The temple of the Lord is in Jerusalem. Okay, Bethel fake temple, Dan fake temple. The real temple is in Jerusalem. As long as we have the temple of the Lord, we will not die. Like that. Okay, that's not true. So what happened is that they were so rebellious against God that God sent the Babylonians. In the ninth year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came with all his army against Jerusalem, laid siege to it. So the city was besieged till the 11th year of King Zedekiah. So this is like 3 years of siege. And 3 years of siege, the famine was so severe in the land that there was no food for the people of the land. All right. People had to like exchange children. You know what's the exchange children for? You take my baby, I take your baby, so that I don't end up eating my own baby, right? So because it was just a terrible situation. So eventually, Jerusalem capitulated. Then they captured the king, brought him up to the king of Babylon at Riblah, and they passed sentence on him. They slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes and put out the eyes of Zedekiah. So they make sure he see his son die and then gouge out his eyes so that that is the last thing he sees. Like that. And bound him in chains and took him to Babylon. So in the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, that was 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the bodyguard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He burned the house of the Lord and the king's house and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every great house he burned down, broke down the walls around Jerusalem, and the rest of the people who were left in the city, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried into exile. But the captain of the guard left some of the poorest of the land to be vine dressers and plowmen so that they can produce food for the Babylonians. So Judah was taken into exile out of its land. So that is the explanation. All these things is the explanation of the people sitting in exile to explain why all these things have happened to them. You get it? All these things have happened to them because they have rebelled against the Lord. They have worshipped idols like that. So that is the mainline story of the mainstream story, mainline story of the Old Testament. So then around this mainline story from Genesis to Second Kings are all these other writings like Psalms, right? Poetry, Proverbs, right? Each of it will then fit into somewhere in that history. Okay, including Ezra and Nehemiah after that, but there's a historical backbone, right? Okay, that you need to know. This Bronze Age period, Judges, United Kingdom, divided kingdom, fall of Samaria, exile to Babylon, return to exile later. And then the other literature will fit in. For example, Psalm 137. All right. It's very easy to know when is this Psalm 137 written. It says, by the rivers of Babylon, right? Okay, not so happy on the song. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there, we hung up our lyres. So these are basically the temple musicians. The temple musicians. For there our captors required of us songs, and our tormentors mirth say, sing us one of the songs of Zion, sing us one of the songs of Zion, the Zion we just destroyed, sing us a song from there. So how shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. The right hand is for the harp. Okay, so yeah, let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, so that I will never play, I will never sing again. If I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the neighbor, okay, the day of Jerusalem, how they say, lay it bare down to its foundations. So the Edomites, God just didn't come to help. There was this celebrating Judah's fall. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed, blessed shall he be who repays you with what you have done to us. Blessed shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock. Because that's what happened to their babies. Like that. So that is the exile, one big cycle to the very start of the lecture. And it is during this period that they are very remorseful and want to learn the writings of the people of old and compile them, right, into Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. What did Moses write? They have something from Moses, all right, and then they will get pieced together, all right, into what we now call the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. So then, there was a prophecy. Jeremiah made a prophecy. Other people made prophecies that exile will not last too long. 50 years, 70 years, they will come back. All right. And so when that eventually happened, there is the return from exile. 2 Chronicles 36 writes, now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. So what happened was that the what is this about? Oh, okay. So this is the Persian Empire. This was the Babylonian Empire, and the Babylonian Empire was taken over by Media Persia. And Media Persia, what happened was that King Cyrus just walked into Babylon, and Babylon didn't want to fight and just opened up the gates for King Cyrus to march through. Like that, it was a walkover. I think the empire has just run out of steam, okay, and just crumbled under its own weight. And Cyrus, king of Persia, has a different policy. Nebuchadnezzar's, the Babylonians' policy was to exile all the people to Babylon to keep your enemies closer. And so the land becomes empty. And then you will facilitate them to march through down to Egypt, because after all, their goal is Egypt, and they don't want all these people in the middle. You know what I mean? Okay. So they depopulated them. The Persians, they have a different understanding. There's that, look, why we have all these people in Babylon? It's like, what are they for? You conquer such a big piece of land, but you don't get to tax those land because nobody live there. Right? Send them back. Send all these people that the Babylonians have captured back into their own lands. Okay, the Jews go back to their own land. Other people go back to their own lands, and each of you go back to your own land and build your own temples, worship your own gods, as long as you pray for the emperor and the empire. Like that lah, huh? Okay, so among those decrees of sending people back was the decree also to send the Jewish people back to build the temple. Now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that means immediately, he comes into power, he executes his policy. That the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled. The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and also put it in writing. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has charged me to build a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you of all his people, may the Lord his God be with him. Let him go up. Let him go up, the word is aliyah. Aliyah. So therefore, the word aliyah is still used by Jews today about Jews overseas, returning back to Israel is called Aliyah, right? And Aliyah is now in our English Bibles, Chronicles is somewhere in the middle of the Old Testament, right? It's Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, then Chronicles, right? First and Second Chronicles. In the Hebrew Bible, that means the way the Jewish people themselves organize the Bible, Second Chronicles is the last book of the Bible. It's the last book of the Old Testament. So the last word of the Hebrew Bible is let him go up. That means the desire of the whole Old Testament is about returning to the land. Returning to the land. All right. So, therefore, this is the historical setting of the books of the Old Testament. I'm not saying that these books are written in the historical period. For example, if right now you write a book on Paramaswara, the setting of the book is 1411. You know, it is not 2026, but it's written in 2026 lah. Just because the story is about something that happened in 1411, it doesn't mean that it's written in 1411. So I'm talking about the setting of the book, not when it was written. Is that okay? So therefore, every book of the Old Testament falls into this time period that I'm talking about. So the Bronze Age, we have Genesis, Job, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua. Okay, that is the Bronze Age era. Huh? Yeah. And then in the period of Judges, we have, of course, Judges and Ruth. And in the United Kingdom period, there's First Samuel, Second Samuel. It's about the United Kingdom because about up to King David. First Chronicles is up to King Solomon, King David, King Solomon. And then a lot of the Psalms of David, right, because it's Davidic Psalms. So I put them under the United Kingdom period. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs is associated with Solomon, right? So therefore, they would be considered literature about this particular historical setting. Now, again, I'm not talking about when it's written. I'm talking about the setting of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs. And then the setting of the during the divided kingdom period, that means after Solomon, King Rehoboam, all the way until the destruction of Jerusalem. We have First Kings, Second Kings, Second Chronicles, Obadiah, Joel, Jonah, Hosea, Amos, Micah. So this would be called the pre-exilic prophets. And then we have the four Samaria onwards, Isaiah, Nahum, Zephaniah, Habakkuk, Jeremiah. And then during the exile, we have Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, and Esther. All right. And after coming back from exile, Esther is actually, but because Esther herself never go back, that's why I put here, her situation might as well be before the exile, during the exile, because she never come back to the Holy Land, right? And then return from exile, we have Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. The last book that made it into the Old Testament was probably Esther. I know that with some certainty because I spent 7 years studying Esther. I just finished studying the book of Esther. Okay, so maybe I'll study another 3 more years on the book of Esther. So here you go. Which means that when you open up the Old Testament, the first thing that you need to know is which bubble I'm at. Does that make sense? Then it will speak differently. They're not all flat. It's not like the New Testament, right? The New Testament is all written about the same 40 years. About something that happened AD 30 all the way until the book of Revelation, say 90 or something like that, 60 years scouting, right? Now we're talking about hundreds of years of history. So you need to know where you are lor, when you read the Old Testament. Okay? Can? So that is the background of the Old Testament. Thank you very much for listening to this sejarah talk. But cannot don't know sejarah one, this one. If you want to know the Bible. Next week, when we come back, we will continue from here. Is that okay? Not next week, ah? Oh, next week is a prayer meeting. The week after next. All right. Any questions? Any questions? No question, ah? Sure, ah? Too much to think about? Thank God for recording. You can go back to YouTube, go on YouTube and watch it again. All right. Let's close in prayer. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, we thank you that you have also given historians to the church, to not just theologians, but also given us historians to piece all these things together so that we are able to have all these things within an hour. But Lord, just goes to shows and tells us how much more there is to learn of your word in order to master and be mastered by your word. Help us to learn all this so that when we read the Bible, we'll be reading them in context and able to appreciate the nuances in there, and also help us to be able to transmit this to the next generation intact. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.